Hello and welcome back to Fundamentals in Ecology. I'm Umesh Srinivasan and I am at the Center for Ecological Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science. And today we will be talking about predation. Like competition, predation has also been one of the important ways in which people have thought about how community structure and function are influenced as being one of those important interactions that influence community structure and community function. And again, like with competition, with predation as well, the realized niche of a species tends to always be smaller than its fundamental niche, because predation prevents the prey species from effectively using the entire space that it can potentially use. That is its fundamental niche. So what is predation? Predation is the consumption of one organism, which is called the prey, by another, which is the predator. In this case, what you're seeing is a great blue heron with a fish. The great blue heron is the predator and the fish is the prey. But predation differs from things like scavenging, where again one organism is feeding on another organism. The difference with predation is that often the prey is alive when the predator finds or attacks it. Right? That's how predation might differ from something like scavenging. We know lots of scavenger species like our kites and our vultures, which might not attack a living animal but might feed on an animal that has already died, or scavenge that animal. There are various types of predators. There are various ways in which you can classify predators. One could be just taxonomically based on what are these predators eating. So carnivores eat animals, and we tend to think of animals being carnivores, but there are a number of species of plants like this Venus flytrap, which are actually carnivorous plants. So those are also predators that eat animals, and they catch and trap living organisms and digest them. So carnivores eat animals, herbivores eat plants, omnivores eat prey or resources at multiple trophic levels. The examples of carnivores, of course, we're all very familiar with the large carnivorous animals like lions and tigers and polar bears and so on. Herbivores as well, elephants and deer and bison are herbivores. And then there are species like primates that feed on multiple trophic levels. They can feed on fruit as well as on meat, and so they feed at multiple trophic levels. Functionally, to classify predators, you can classify predators as true predators. These are the kinds of predators these are the kinds of species that come to mind when we use the word predator. An eagle or a tiger or a lion. These are species that kill other species. Typically, immediately after a successful predation event, the prey animal or the prey species dies almost immediately. And true predators often consume their prey in entirety. They often consume the prey. If you think of a crocodile swallowing an entire antelope, that's an example of true predation. There are grazers. Grazers are species that feed on vegetation, grazers and browsers. Again, cows, buffaloes, sheep, goats, these are grazers. They are in fact causing a loss of fitness to the prey item that they're preying on, in a sense, right? That's the definition of predation. Predation is a species interaction where one species, the predator, benefits, but the other species, the prey, loses. Yes, and just like that nature of antagonism includes predation, it does include also predator-like interactions such as parasitism and parasitoids. Parasites, we're familiar with parasites, many kinds of diseases that affect species, affect hosts. Those are parasites. The parasites do not necessarily kill the host outright, but over time the effects of the parasite might be such that the virility of the parasite might be so high that the host individual dies. So true predators sort of eat the prey from the outside, and parasites are reducing fitness and taking resources away from the prey or the host from the inside. Parasitoids are another class of organisms, and they're not uncommon. It's thought that about 10% of all species on Earth are actually parasitoids. These are not true predators in that the individual predator that kills an individual prey item is not what is happening here. Parasitoids might, for example, lay their eggs in the bodies of other organisms. So, for example, parasitoid wasps. There are hundreds of species of parasitoid wasps. Some of them specialize on spiders. So, what the parasitoid wasp does is to inject a venom in the spider that immobilizes it, and then it lays its eggs in the spider, and the eggs hatch, and the larvae then consume the spider from within, ultimately leading to its death. So it's not the organism that actually immobilized the spider that is actually eating the spider. It's the offspring of that individual that is eating the spider. So it's a unique class of predation, but it comes in its own category, which is called and the organisms that practice this kind of predation are called parasitoids. When we talk about predation, predator and prey, and you would have come across this in the Lotka-Volterra two species predator prey model, which actually predicts cycles of population sizes in predation, predators and prey, and we'll take a look at that with the Canada lynx and the snowshoe hare in a little bit. But some of the terms that are fundamental to our understanding of predation is one, functional response, which is the rate at which a predator consumes prey as a function of prey density. So if you had if you think of a graph, and on that graph on the x-axis you had prey density increasing, and then you have the rate at which a predator is actually eating that prey as a function of prey density. So when prey density is very low, the rate at which the predator might be eating the prey might also be very low, because that prey might be difficult to find, it's at low densities. But as the density of that prey increases, maybe the ability of the predator to find the prey and so on, just the fact that it's more easily detectable might make the functional response go higher, which is the rate at which the predator is now feeding on this prey is higher because the prey density is higher, the density of the prey is higher. But that's not always the case. That can't go on forever and ever, because the predator can't infinitely keep increasing the rate at which it consumes prey, even if the prey abundances keep increasing to very, very high levels. Because, for example, every predator needs some time to handle the prey, to then feed on the prey, and so you could find a pattern where the functional response increases linearly until some point beyond which feeding time and handling time of the predators prevent them from increasing the functional response. These are called Halling curves, and there are three types of Halling curves: type 1, type 2 and type 3. Named after a scientist called C.S. Halling. So if you want to get into more detail regarding the functional response, then a good place to start are the Halling curves. The numerical response is the change in predator density as a function of prey density. So if prey density keeps rising, can predator density keep rising as well, unlimitedly, indefinitely, and there are various ways in which that could or might not happen. And one of the things we talk about when we talk about predation is something called conversion efficiency. How much of the prey that is consumed is converted into the biomass of the predators. Right? So if I eat 1 unit of prey, if a tiger eats one deer, right, how much does that one deer contribute to an increase in tiger biomass through the increase in offspring, for example. So that's what the conversion efficiency is. How much of predator biomass is coming from the consumption of 1 unit of prey. So basically what's happening here is that predators are consuming prey biomass into their own biomass. Yeah, and how efficient is that rate of conversion? So for example, for a tiger eating one deer, the conversion efficiency is likely to be is going to be much higher than for this humpback whale that feeds on tiny organisms called krill, millions and millions of organisms of krill. So to convert all of each individual krill into the biomass of a humpback whale, the conversion efficiency is low, whereas the conversion efficiency of the tiger converting one deer into new tigers, higher tiger biomass is much higher than the conversion efficiency for the humpback whale. The two predator-prey Lotka-Volterra model predicts cycles, so cycling in predator and prey populations. The classical example is that of the snowshoe hare and the Canada lynx, and this comes from the Hudson Trading Company. The Hudson Trading Company was collecting the pelts or the skins of these animals since the mid 1800s, and they had a record of how many pelts or how many skins of snowshoe hare they got in a particular year, and how many pelts or skins of the Canada lynx that they got in a particular year. So if there were yearly records for this, and what you can see here, very often what you see is, if you look at the snowshoe hare population peaks in this year, and then followed by a little lag, the population of the Canada lynx also peaks. And what happens with predator-prey cycles in this case is that when snowshoe hare populations rise, when snowshoe hare populations become high, lynx populations convert that biomass of snowshoe hare, and this is almost a 1:1 interaction where the predominant prey of the snowshoe hare is the Canada lynx, and the predominant predator of the snowshoe hare is the Canada lynx. And so because of that tight interaction, because of the tight coupling of this interaction, often snowshoe hare populations will peak, and then after a little bit of a lag, the Canada lynx populations will reach a high, because in that time is when the Canada lynx has converted the biomass of the snowshoe hare into its own biomass, into Canada lynx biomass. Now what you have is the density or the abundance of these two animals, the prey on the left, which is how many thousands of hares were actually collected versus how many thousands of lynx. And obviously the prey density is higher than predator density, because the predator is converting prey biomass into its own biomass, and there is a loss in energy, there is a loss in matter when that conversion happens, and so prey biomasses are almost always higher than predator biomasses. And so you can see prey numbers are almost always higher. So you can see these cycling, the population of snowshoe hare followed by numbers of lynx in the habitat. And so again, this is predicted by the Lotka-Volterra predator-prey model, where an increase in prey numbers is followed by an increase in predator numbers, but that increase in predator numbers then leads to a decline in prey numbers because of high predation rates. When that happens, the predator numbers also fall because prey biomass is low, and that cycle keeps repeating itself, leading to this kind of cyclical pattern in the numbers of prey and predators. So if just note that the thousands of hares here and the thousands of lynx here are on very different scales. We're talking about things like 120,000 hares, 160,000 lynx, but 160,000 hares, but we're talking only about 6,000 or 9,000 lynx. And so the population size of the predator is far smaller than the population sizes of the prey. Here is an example of habitat selection and community structure being influenced by predation, by predators, and this is from North America, where you have multiple habitats, multiple patches of habitat, which are called woodlots, and so you've got different patches of forest in this landscape, and these bird species that you're seeing in the center, they actually breed on in these patches of forest, breed in these woodlots. What you're seeing on the left are photographs of species that are nest predators. They feed on the nests of these species that are breeding in these habitats, in these forest patches. What Fontaine and Martin did was to be able to actually go to some of these forest patches and remove these predators entirely. They just make that patch of forest free of nest predators. There are no more nest predators anymore in those patches of forest. So some patches of forest have nest predators, other patches of forest don't have nest predators. And the results in terms of what happens if when you remove nest predators is very striking. So what you've got on the y-axis, on the graph over here to the on the y-axis here, is the percentage difference in predation rate, in breeding density, in singing rates of these species relative to the percentage differences relative to the control which still has the predators on it, and those differences for a variety of bird species here. Each of these bars on the x-axis represents one species, and they've looked at it for resident species that and for migratory species as well. Daily nest predation rate comes down sometimes really drastically when you remove nest predators, right? You've got nest predation rates coming down by 80% from some relative baseline, a decline in 80% in nest predation rate, decline in 90% in nest predation rates of these. Breeding densities of most species goes up in the absence of predators. The rates at which birds sing is also higher in areas that don't have predators than in areas that have predators. And so behavior, breeding density, nest predation rate, all of these are changing as a result of lack of predators. So birds in this case are actually able to perceive that there is a lack of predators in this particular forest patch, and therefore are not as wary about singing and advertising themselves, because the chance of a predator being there listening to their song and coming and attacking them and killing them is lower than in areas where you do have predators. So the singing rates are going up. Breeding densities for most bird species are going up sometimes by 200%, right? So you're doubling breeding bird densities. That is actually quite a huge impact on community structure. Where your community would have been structured in this way, in the presence of predators, you actually have an increase in the breeding densities of these species as a result of the lack of predation. So predation is having an important impact on changing breeding bird densities. It's having an impact on changing reproductive rates as well, right? It's removal of predators leads to more successful reproduction because nest predation rates come down. So it's changing the structure of the community through habitat selection. Yeah. So predation is in some cases a very important determinant of community structure. We've looked at some of this in the past when we talked about species interactions and we talked about keystone predation. And keystone predation, we've looked at this with the black-tip reef shark populations decline, and then the secondary consumer, which is eaten by the black-tip reef shark, the cow-nose ray, its populations increase, and as the cow-nose ray populations increase, the decline in the abundance of primary consumers, because cow-nose rays are eating those primary consumers, which are these mussels. The evidence for trophic cascades, and these are called trophic cascades, where you remove the apex predator and in subsequently lower trophic levels you see cascading effects, cascading and opposite effects, increase for the secondary consumer, decrease for the primary consumer, and then for the producer perhaps an increase as well. So these are cascading effects across trophic levels, and these have been well studied and well established in many systems. One of those was wolves in Yellowstone National Park in the United States. So wolves were exterminated from Yellowstone National Park, and because of what had happened is that the population of the prey of the wolves, deer for example, elk, shot up, and as the populations of the deer went up, grazing activity by deer also went up, which led to a reduction in the number of seedlings and saplings that actually made it to be adults, because they were being grazed even before they could reach adulthood. And then the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, and actually that has caused a reduction in the size of the deer population. And once the size of the deer population is reduced, what happens is now that the tree species called aspen, which used to be grazed upon by these elk and these deer when they were saplings, actually now grow into adulthood, and it's changed the structure of the landscape, it's changed the nature of the landscape. And so predation can be a very, very important interaction between species that has implications for other trophic levels, for other things in the landscape. Can be very, very strong. We've also looked at this, which is Mesopredator release, where on Barro Colorado Island, which is in the country of Panama, the removal of the jaguar or the local extinction of the jaguar, and that's because each jaguar requires a certain minimum geographical area to persist, to be able to maintain a viable population. And once you have the fragmentation of this large forest patch and the creation of this island called Barro Colorado Island, you no longer have the required area available to support jaguars. And the jaguars were actually keeping the activity of what are called mesopredators like ocelots and coatis and jaguarundis. They were keeping that activity down, and so when the jaguars disappeared, the activity of these species, which are mesopredators, intermediate sized predators, went up. So you've got an apex predator in the jaguar and you've got mesopredators in these species, and when these species increase their activity in the absence of the jaguar, on the island, Barro Colorado Island, these species were eating almost 90% of the nests that were close to the ground, that were built on the ground, leading to the local extinction from the island of multiple bird species. And if you compare the same rate of nest predation on the island, ground nests on the ground are preyed upon by these species only maybe 5 to 8%. And that's because the jaguar is keeping these species, the activity of these species into low levels. And so here you've got a situation where you've got an apex predator here that is not directly interacting with any of these birds on this side, right? The apex predator is not directly interacting with any of these, but through other indirect mechanisms, the apex predator is actually allowing these multiple birds to coexist in a particular location when it is present, because then it keeps the activity of mesopredators down. So mesopredator release is also a well documented phenomenon in the absence of apex predators. So for example, if you had to compare areas that had tigers and the activity of leopards in areas that have tigers versus the activity of leopards at areas that don't have tigers, leopards can become they can increase in their abundances, they can become more active during the day because there are no tigers to directly interfere or to kill them, and so they can become more, they can broaden their niche in the absence of the apex predator. So But there are many systems in which predation might not be as important. The impacts might be more bottom up. It might be the availability of resources that is more important in determining community structure rather than the top down impact of predation. It could be a bottom up effect where the abundances of a species at a particular trophic level is determined more by the availability of resources at that lower trophic level than the importance of predation at the higher trophic. There might be systems in which predation actually is not a very important force in maintaining structure and function of communities. Predation is also a very strong, can be a very strong force in evolution, and this is an insectivorous bats, and these bats eat moths, and the way in which so the bats are predators and the moths are prey, and the way in which the bats catch the moths is through echolocation. They send out pulses they create pulses of sound that that go out, hit the moth, and are reflected back to the bat, and the bat picks up those reflections. It's like radar, or echolocation is like sonar. It picks up those signals and then closes in on the moth and feeds on the moth. What moths have done over evolutionary time is to alter their behavior in such a way that some species of moths can actually jam that sonar. They can jam the echolocation by creating sounds of their own. So they might rub their abdomen against their genitals, which creates a certain frequencies, high frequency sound, which then makes it difficult for the bat to actually accurately find the moth. So bats, in response to that, have evolved to change the frequency of that echolocation pulse beyond what the moth can hear, right? And so this is called an arms race. The predation is happening. Because predation is happening, the prey needs to do something to be able to better avoid predation. Once the prey comes up with some strategy to avoid predation, the predator has to now evolve some strategy to counter the prey's strategy. And this constant change in strategies of predation, predators and prey, where they're keeping up with each other in terms of their strategies, is what's called an evolutionary arms race. So this was predation. The next time we will talk about parasitism and disease in structuring communities. It can be very important. We're seeing how pandemics, we're seeing how zoonotic disease is actually affecting wild communities in nature. For example, Ebola affecting gorilla and chimpanzee communities, populations, and so on. So parasitism is a disease in the next session. Thank you very much for coming today, and see you next time.